All right. Thank you all for joining us. We will get started here. James is out, but clerk, can you call the roll?
Angie Wolf.
Here.
Barb Stotts.
Here.
Matt Crowe. Mary Beth Schall.
Here.
James Cartman. Cindy Viking.
Here. Great, thank you for that. I have proof of policy. Please join me for the pledge of allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Awesome. Great. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll make a motion.
Second.
James isn't here.
Yeah. Step it up now.
Stone Mike.
Great. Are there any questions or changes needed? Hearing none. Mary Beth?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Barb? Yes. Angie?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
I'll say yes as well. No public input, so we'll keep moving on. Do I have a motion to approve the Board of Education minutes from July 12th?
I'll make a motion.
Second.
Thank you both. Any changes noticed or anything? Hearing none. Mary Beth?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Barb?
Yes.
Angie?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
And I'll say yes as well. On to the next minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the Board of Education workshop meeting minutes from July 19th?
Second.
Mary Beth and Matt, any changes, questions? Not hearing any. Mary Beth?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Barb? Yes. Angie?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
And I'll say yes as well. Should I slow down? Am I going too fast?
Nope. I was just flipping pages. I was ahead of you.
I saw your flip. Perfect. Well, we are right up to district business. Jordan, I'll let you
Yep.
talk about the school remodeling.
Yep. So we have Mike Betcher here again under 4.1 updates on the middle school, high school remodel, and elementary school construction. You can see Bev has the document up on the smart board as well. So Mike, you just want to take it away.
Hey, how's everybody doing?
Good.
Good to see you. We'll start with the high school, middle school renovations. We're continuing on with quite a bit of what we communicated last meeting update, but getting into some of the detail, the mechanical air handling replacements, we're wrapping those up. We've got most of the actual air handlers installed now and the ductwork in. We're finishing piping. Same thing with the chillers. We're finishing the chiller piping for that equipment. That's been installed for a little bit. Now we're just finishing all the power and connections and controls. The bathroom remodel, we actually just finished the new epoxy flooring throughout all the bathrooms. We've got the ceilings in, and so now we're moving on to trim some of the other finishes in the next couple of weeks. In the high school corridor ceilings, we have all the acoustic ceiling grid in. We're dropping tile and doing trims throughout there as well. VCU installations, we basically have all those installed, piped, ducted. We're just doing like trim covers and some other punch items, like things like that, so small minor things for all the classrooms. The high school classroom ceiling painting somewhat follows the VCU installation, so that's like halfway done, and so now the painters just kind of following in the last 5 to 7 classrooms where we wrapped up the main VCU installations, the vertical classrooms. So the next couple weeks that will also be all wrapped up. Same thing with the kitchen hood. We've got that up and installed now. We've got power to it. We've got a cancel system in there that's got to get connected and some trims put up, and then that will be wrapped up in the next couple weeks. And then same thing, our HVAC control system, wiring panels, devices, that's all coming along. We're having all those mechanical replacements in hand with that. That powers I outlined. We also started the corridor flooring replacement over in the main entry area, so we're sequencing kind of in the main campus main entrance, the middle school side main entrance, going through corridors near the gyms, between the gyms and locker rooms after that, then heading through around the middle school wing, and then kind of back behind the art band, kind of all that whole area in terms of like sequencing in general. The flooring replacements over 3 to 4 weeks, that kind of gets all wrapped up as well. So in summary, we're really tracking along pretty well, and then we can just scroll through and you can see, be able to see most of the pictures there. There's a kitchen front serving line. We're going to put tile on that tomorrow. You can see there's some of the high school corridor ceilings completed, tile drop down those different corridors. You can see the VCU installations with the ceilings painted and everything's white. All the ductwork and everything. There's a mechanical chiller replacement, more of the pumps going in and all the main piping for that, and that receiving room, and that classrooms, or 2 of the classrooms are expanded, we removed storage, so that's kind of like the new wall between them, and expanding those 2 classrooms is about to be painted.
So those were the 2 social studies rooms down at the end of that high school hallway. Trevor Steiner in the other social studies room. There used to be an office area in between the 2, and then it just become a junk storage area.
Watch out.
So we had asked for them to demo those walls, so each room actually gained, I think it's 6 feet of floor space in the back of the room, so 12 feet total square footage to those 2 classrooms, so.
And then you can see the main entrance flooring installation, the start of that there.
Is that getting one of those logos in the
Yeah,
middle?
yeah, actually, we're.
Yeah, I kind of figured that's what that was.
That's what's left out, just put that.
It's gonna be a fountain there, actually. One of those boys holding a book where you throw
The high
pencils.
school was getting one, I didn't know if the main entrance was all.
Yeah, we had 2
It's
of
water
them, the high school one. Yeah.
You used to see it at the mall.
Yes.
Then with the elementary school progress, so we are continuing on building foundations. So now we actually have the footing and foundation walls done like on the whole south and west sides. And then we've also picked up some of the interior footings as well. And now we are on like the north and east sides of the building. And then we're going to be starting underground this week with the plumber, kind of in the southwest side. Now that we've gotten those foundations like substantially complete to just kind of flow kind of the direction we're going with underground to then slab on grade, like I mentioned. And then site utilities are moving really fast too. We started last week and there you have that, the main storm pipes that were kind of across the whole north side of the building. Those are already installed, not fully complete, but both of them installed, and then they're moving on to like the west and south sides this week. And they're looking to really get wrapped up in the next couple weeks.
Do you think the footings are gonna be poured on that north end this week? I mean, they really made a lot of progress.
I think they're pouring either tomorrow or Wednesday, they're gonna pour the actual footings
Okay.
along what they dug out. I don't think it's the whole north end, but a good
Okay.
portion of it. But yeah.
Cause he was at the very corner this morning when I walked by at 7 o'clock, and then when I went back out there this afternoon, he had made it a substantial way down the dig, and I was
Yeah.
surprised how far they made it.
And that's how it kind of goes too, is like, you first get on board and there's like an exponential curve. Like you're learning the job, and you're kind of learning it, and then you start getting to the thick of it and you get a lot more done. So yeah, it seems like they're picking up a lot of steam in terms of knowing the job and like kind of working through it. But yeah, it looks like the next couple of weeks they've had most of the foundations done, so that sticks to when you think about some of the weather days, duration for that, and we get underground going, we keep this flow going, we should be able to stick to that summer.
Okay.
I just had a couple pictures here of the foundations, so you can see what I'm talking about. And then on Thursday, there wasn't a ton to take for site utilities yet, except for just some of the finished stuff across a certain area, but we got a lot more done. Thursday and Friday.
You mentioned the bathroom work. There's the bathrooms down by the Family Consumer Science CTE area. Going from this, yes. Yes. The word-
South restroom.
The South restroom. In what I believe is the girls' bathroom, there's like an electrical panel that's still on the wall in there. What's gonna happen with that? I noticed that today when I walked down there, and obviously that's not the finish, so what's gonna happen with that?
Yeah, so we can put a cover on that, but it's not gonna be accessible to the students. Yeah.
Anything else, Mike, to put out there?
No, I think that's a summary of the operations updates.
It's kind of neat at this point now because you can see the progress, before you're just kind of talking about it and, sharing all the details, but now you can actually see it, so it's substantial now, it's really,
Yeah.
very
things are
exciting.
really coming along.
So for the high school, lots of things going on, everything gonna be finished on time for the start of school?
Yeah, it's looking like we should be in good shape to do that. We had a few clarifications with the school where under the new control system, everything should be operational, but we have to do a seasonal optimization. It's kind of a standard process where every bell and whistle operate, we have to go through all the season and kind of tune that in, but, the equipment will work and a lot of it will function. It's just kind of going through all the process with that though, to like fine tune everything.
So I think ideally, if everything goes well, we'll have that next board meeting here, because that'll be August 9th. But then in a perfect world, we have the August 23rd board meeting back at the middle school, high school. That's our first night of all staff in service, so we're quite optimistic that everything's gonna be ready. questions for Mike? All right, thanks for being here, Mike, appreciate it.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you. All right, wonderful. On to 4.2, action on, or possible action to approve the attached 21-22 Fund 46 long-range facility plan. So we've been talking quite a bit about this. Does anybody have any last minute questions on what we've discussed or what we've put on or changed?
Just so you know, I mean, this isn't like this document now like lives in a sealed case for the next year. Just if we make changes to it, we need to get it approved again. So just because we're approving it right now, doesn't mean that we can't touch this again until next summer. If things come up and we want to make additions, subtractions, whatever, we just then need to have some sort of board action to approve that change. Now, this is just what we've done the last 3 years, is having one like annual approval per se, but that doesn't mean that's the way it has to be moving forward. So just rest assured that if something comes up in the next 3 to 6 months, we can still make a change to this before we can access the funds next summer.
So what, when it says classroom renovations, what exactly would that entail?
Yeah, well, truth be told, in part, that's a catch-all.
Mhm.
So,
Okay.
Anything.
Okay.
yeah, pretty much.
I didn't know if there was like anything specific, like flooring or painting or,
No,
you
so
know,
if you
anything
notice
like that.
at the top of the document,
Mhm.
we've tried to kind of keep the things on there that we think annually, now that
Right.
we're gonna be close to caught up,
Mhm.
that annually we should try to address. So I mean, like painting, Mike talked about some of the classrooms and how now the ceilings are actually white. You
Mhm.
can't see rust or yellowing in the ceiling. Well, we're not gonna get every classroom painted
Right.
through virtue of this project. So knowing that our maintenance staff only has enough time and you know, individuals, that would be something where we'll try to put together a schedule
Okay.
and then just work our way through the rooms. I mean, the classroom renovations, yeah, really, Angie, it's just kind of as needed, or if
Okay.
we, you know, as enrollment shifts or things change.
Right.
You don't have to tie certain classrooms to that, do you?
No,
Okay.
It's just
no.
like whatever
It's
comes
just
up
any
that
classroom
needs
that's
something.
covered.
Exactly.
Okay, okay.
I do see you got high school, middle school kitchen upgrades. Is that stuff that's not getting done with this remodel?
So initially, when they looked at scope, I mean, to like completely gut and redo the kitchen, that itself was like $1 million
Yeah.
project. So we weren't gonna tackle that and eat up $1 million or $5 million that we had for the middle school, high school. So we made choices in terms of things that we thought were most essential to take care of in the kitchen. But yes, that would include
Stuff that's not
some
being
more
done.
substantial
Okay.
things that are not being done. I think part of it for us is we get into the new building a year from now and then see how all these systems tie together once we're on a single campus. We need to best meet our needs long-term, and I think that's where this comes into place. That's why we're trying to build in some flexibility.
All right, well, not hearing any other questions, do I have a motion to approve the changes?
I move to approve.
Second.
Thank you, Matt and Angie. Any other comments? No one wants to put up? Hearing none. Mary Beth?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Barb? Yes. Angie?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
And I will say yes as well. Great, operation updates.
All right, thanks, Beth, you're so fast.
I'm on top of it today.
All right, so I guess first thing, I just wanted to provide, so if you want to click, Bev, on, yep, that document, yes, please. So we had received the guidance from the CDC a couple of weeks ago. It said that Public Health Madison-Dane County was going to work on kind of taking that CDC guidance and putting together something to kind of fit what's going on in Dane County. So this document is attached in the presentation. Obviously, I will be sending you the PDF version of the presentation after the meeting tonight, so you can access it in greater detail and kind of peruse it yourself if you already have not. But a few things, both the CDC and Public Health, Madison-Dane County, are recommending mask wearing for unvaccinated individuals. Obviously, the difference of where we're at now compared to where we were at a year ago is we are receiving recommendations and not requirements. And that's a much different place than we were 12 months ago. But the one thing I want to point out in here at this point is if you want to scroll down, Bev, under section 2, I think from a practical standpoint, and this is something that when we met as superintendents with Public Health Madison-Dane County, we asked them to kind of spell out or provide in their professional estimation, kind of what are the potential implications of the decisions we make as school districts? Because as I said previously, I get the sense that Dane County is going to be in 14 different directions this year, depending on who you are and kind of what's happening in your district. So what we had asked Public Health is to kind of put together what they thought the strategy would do, and then kind of what consequences perhaps would be of the various strategies that we would employ as a school district. So I don't want to go through this right now, word by word, but I just want to encourage you, please, because obviously we need to make some decisions in the next 2 weeks, and we want it to be an informed decision. And whichever decision we make, I guess my goal is always we go into it eyes wide open and understand here's kind of where we're at and what the implications are for the decisions that we make. So you can see on here they talk about the strategy, then they talk about if masking is required, but then they talk about if masking is optional as well. So they kind of lay it out there in terms of here's what they see as the potential consequences. I mean, the key word is potential. We can't speculate until we actually experience this and we get in and we're in person. Then if you want to go down to section 3 as well. So I thought this scenario, you know, to people that don't live this, breathe this, aren't involved in this all the time, I thought this scenario, I guess, was helpful to someone that's not necessarily that well versed. So I mean, the top one talks about if masking is required. Well, here's kind of how the scenario plays out if someone comes in with a headache. They go to class, they go to lunch, and then here's what happens. And then you can see there under that it has the outcome. No other students or staff need to miss school because they were all masked or vaccinated. So in that case, they had a mandatory mask order in that school. Other kids, even though they were close contacts, would not have to quarantine because masking was in place. But now if you go down to the second one, Bev, it's the same scenario, but in this case now masking is optional. And now you can see the outcome on the bottom there. Because the individual was not wearing a mask, any students who came into close contact would need to quarantine for a minimum of 7 days. They would have to get a negative test on day 6 to be released from quarantine. So once again, I'm just trying to put this out there so we understand the results or potential results of the decisions that we make in the next 2 weeks. So I would just, like I said, encourage you to please take a look at this. And I thought section 2 and section 3 that I just referenced in this document were the most helpful because it kind of puts things in the most simple terms in terms of if you do this, here's the way you can go. So I guess I would just once again encourage you to take a look at that and then offer any questions you may have in the meantime. But I thought that part was helpful. So I guess before we just jump into the next slide, do you have any questions on the guidance itself from Public Health Madison-Dane County?
I actually do have a question, as I was reading through this earlier. So if you look at section 3, it says compare, you know, when you compare the mask versus unmasked. Now, in the first, up at the top, you know, masks required for all unvaccinated students, teachers, and staff. Now, my question is, you know, it says no other students or staff need to miss school because they're all masked or vaccinated. Now, are we gonna try to take the approach of, you know, when we're talking about the students, like those that are under 12, if they have to mask, are we going to be requiring the teachers even though they're vaccinated? I'm just trying to figure out, you know, are we gonna make it like, you know, across the board for the elementary versus, you know, what teachers are vaccinated, they don't have to wear masks and the students do. I'm just trying to kind of get a clarification on, you know, weighing both sides of that, like how are we gonna perceive, you know, that whole piece of it.
Yep, and we had this conversation last week during our operational planning. Scott, do you just want to speak to that from?
Yeah, I mean, I thought about that too, because the staff or the age, that it was an option for them whether they took it or not. But from my perspective, I would say we still would. If we're going to ask our students to do it, and the simple fact is, a lot of this is just modeling, right? If the kids see the adults doing it, it's an easier sell, I guess, for lack of a better term. Do you know what I mean?
And that's what I kind of thought too, but you know, I was reading through this document, and again, it's not like it's required to do it, it's more of a guideline, so you kind of have to pick out, you know, there is definitely some gray area in there, and that's what I was trying to figure out. Okay, it's like, you know, kind of set the standard of, we're gonna ask the students to do it, are we gonna, you know, ask that the teachers do it as well? And that's what I kind of thought it would be, more of a modeling for the students, so that, you know, the students would be more apt to, you know, continue to wear their masks. So I was just wanted to make sure about that. And then my other question is, when it talks about, you know, the indoors versus the outdoors, are we going to kind of keep the same approaches, or think about doing the same approaches we did at the end of last year, to where if you're outside at recess, do they need to have masks on when they're outside at recess, or doing outside FIED or anything like that? Are we gonna kind of stick with what we did kind of towards the end of last year and like what we're doing at summer school?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, I think at this point, we feel comfortable with what that
Right.
evolution has looked like. The science has supported the fact that indoors and outdoors are two very different animals.
Okay.
So I don't see any reason why we would backtrack on that. We would just stick with what we did at the very end of last school year,
Okay.
and then certainly in the summer school day. Even if we did make a mask requirement, if you will, for, yes, an unvaccinated population indoors, we would still allow them not to have a mask
Okay.
outdoors.
Okay. That's all.
Yep, thank you, I appreciate it, good questions. You go to the next one. So, I mean, this is a broken record by this point, but I think if anything else, it demonstrates consistency. This has been the same slide for 13 or 14 months now, and I do believe it serves relatively well to remain consistent in what we're using to inform our decisions. Attendance procedures, very similar. If you just want to click on the student one. These documents too will look familiar if you remember what we did last summer. This is this is one of the most essential precautions we can take, though, is helping to inform people that if you're not well, please don't send your child to school, or as a staff member, if you're not well, gone are the days of toughing it out. Because toughing it out in the middle of a pandemic is just not the behavior that we want. So these are basically identical forms. If you just want to scroll down, Bev. Really the only point of interest here that is different is a year ago we did not have a vaccination. This year we do have a vaccination, and these are still in draft format. We need to refine these potentially, but we do call out the fact that there is a difference if you're vaccinated or unvaccinated if you're in close contact. And that same thing, you know, applies for the other procedures as well. So these documents are just taken directly from a year ago. They're still sound. Symptoms are still largely the same as well. So these would be items that we would procedurally have in place and we would share with staff and students in this fall. School testing. Once again, this is a tool, if you will. We talked about like layered precautions. This is a tool that we did not have in place a year ago. So the first piece is asymptomatic. We're not planning on doing like screening testing at this point. We don't have the people power to do that. I don't know many school districts that have the people power to do screening testing, but we would be looking at testing symptomatic individuals by trained school personnel. Obviously, if they're students, we need parental consent. We can't just take them in a room and test them. So that'll be a key component to this as well. And then the second bullet point there, Department of Health Services. This is a free service through the state this year. This is something they're really supporting districts and utilizing. They're in the process of matching schools with approved testing vendors to do this in the schools, so we don't have to take the time out of kids' schedules, parents' schedules, whatever. And they're starting this week with the meetings. I don't know if Katie has a meeting scheduled yet, but she is our point of contact. So I'm assuming she'll probably have that meeting in the next week or two to get matched up with the vendor, and then so we can kind of understand what this is going to look like.
And are these like the rapid tests, or?
I believe, yeah, Matt, these would be the rapid test, correct?
Yeah, I haven't heard, that was the initial plan, that they would be the rapid test. Is that are they thinking like vendor just to do like few tests, or are they like doing school-wide tests on a regular basis, you know, to keep kids in school, I guess?
So, I mean, we would be looking at symptomatic individuals or potentially close contact type situations. So, I mean, what that ended up looking like in terms of volume, guess I don't want.
I was just curious, if it was like, you know, the UW did, where they're gonna try and test everybody, they can come, if you test, then you,
No,
I just
we wouldn't be in a
involved
situation
that
that
would
we
be-
like mass testing like that, like I said, from a staffing standpoint. Katie, I'm guessing would, and then, I mean, whoever we can possibly train, we don't know yet what the requirements are to train somebody else potentially, so this could be a one-person operation, Katie potentially, depending on what the rules are.
And this is gonna be students and staff, obviously, if a staff
Correct.
ends up being symptomatic too.
Correct.
And this is all irrelevant of vaccinations, right? If you're unvaccinated or vaccinated.
Yeah, if you're symptomatic, yeah.
I think obviously, stating the obvious, the logistics of the unmasked individuals, even if they're vaccinated, coming into close contact and having to quarantine is just, not that I'm advocating one way or the other, but just to state the obvious, logistically, what the admin are.
So if they're not symptomatic, that's the key point with
True.
someone that's
Right.
vaccinated.
Right.
If they don't have symptoms, they wouldn't have to quarantine if they were in close contact, but if they had symptoms, they would. That actually is an excellent segue. I've looked at this a
I
few
did read
times,
it,
so I
but,
remember
yeah.
this. Hey Katie, are you on?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing all the questions though.
Nope, that's all right. We can rephrase if need be. We're not having a hard time hearing you.
Okay, that's good. Just so you know, when it goes to the testing, I haven't heard anything yet. And we'd probably do the rapid at school, but we'd possibly be able to do PCRs too, like send them out. I got to talk more with our match once we get it, so I haven't heard anything yet.
Okay, sounds good. You just want to kind of run through the quarantine procedures for us?
Yep. So we have a few different things we could do for quarantine. We could do the normal, the 7-day, have a negative test collected no earlier than day 6. So you could do 7 days, but you have to come back with that negative test. Or if they don't want to get tested, they could do the 10-day quarantine. And you wouldn't have to get tested with that one. The thing that has come out that's new is there's an alternative quarantine that's only available if we have a mask mandate and all the students are masked then. So with that, close contacts would not have to quarantine from school since mitigation strategies in schools have been pretty successful to reduce the amount of transmission that there is. They thought it would be okay for people not to have to quarantine from school as long as it's a fully masked environment. But close contacts would still need to quarantine outside of school and from extracurricular activities. And again, that's with correct and consistent mask use. And that's been associated with less transmission in schools, and that's why they're allowing that. So those are kind of our quarantine options.
So before we move on from this one, does anyone have any questions?
I just have a question with the vaccinated versus unvaccinated. Are you guys gonna be keeping tabs on every person that is and isn't, and how to monitor all that?
Did you hear that, Katie? Mike asked a question about are we keeping tabs on who is and who is not vaccinated, and how are we kind of monitoring that?
Yep, so if you are vaccinated, you would not have to quarantine as long as you don't have symptoms. We can see people's immunization status through WER. Actually, WER and Skyward can talk to each other now, basically, and their records can just get uploaded into Skyward, so we can look and see who has been vaccinated.
So Katie, where is Wisconsin Immunization Registry?
Yes,
I saw some faces when you gave the acronym, so I wanted to make sure.
my bad.
It's okay.
And what are the top symptoms that they're, I mean, I saw the list, but like, anybody can tell through the winter months, everybody has the sniffles, I mean, so I guess again, logistically, you're not symptomatic, but you have one symptom, even if you're vaccinated.
Didn't it always say you had to have 3 symptoms to?
So they're talking about symptoms, Katie, and the possibility of like testing, quarantining, what that would look like. So
No, but
you
if you
just
have
talk
3 on
to,
that list, then.
like
you
from a
would have-
logistical standpoint, and even what you saw in the past, kind of what did that look like as you were trying to monitor symptoms?
Yeah.
I still didn't hear all of that.
Sorry.
It's okay. So the question was just kind of regarding symptoms and the possibility of then either testing or then even maybe doing quarantine based on symptoms. And I guess the way I try to phrase it for you is, can you kind of talk about even this last school year, because clearly you had a lot of this experience, what did that process look like when you were monitoring kiddos or even adults for potential COVID symptoms?
Symptoms after an exposure or symptoms in general?
I think in general.
If somebody has symptoms, they have to have 2 or more unless it's a cough, and that's when they would get excluded. I mean, obviously, those are self-reported unless we see them at school. But then they would have to go get tested, and let us know what the test result was before that they could come back. Hopefully, we'll be able to help provide those tests so people won't have to go out and get tests. But again, that might have to be a PCR test. So that's why I'm trying to figure out the details of the testing, whether it be rapid or PCR test. Does that answer the question? Sorry.
Yeah, I think so. I think just the general understanding is it will be complex. Because especially now that we've, for the most part, I think families have gotten out and have started to do a little bit more. They've been exposed to more other things. Some of the crud that we didn't see last winter because we weren't going places and we were wearing masks all over, the crud has come out now. That was a scientific term.
Very good. Beth, can you go back, because I had a question, I don't remember what it was, I'm hoping, oh yeah, parental consent. So are we gonna ask for parental consent like ahead in the beginning of the year and say, if we need to test your kid, can we, or are we gonna do at the time of the event?
I honestly can't answer that question, and I guess that's something I'm hoping that we
Again,
Go ahead, Katie.
we should be getting parental consent at the beginning of the year. That's part of the whole packet of information we're supposed to be getting is like consent forms that we should send out at the beginning of the year.
Okay.
That'll be much easier.
I couldn't
Just to
imagine
get
having
a
a
blanket.
kid sitting there.
I know, and trying to get a hold of the parents, and yeah, that would just make it so much easier.
Yeah.
And then I'm assuming that those students that are 18 years of age, do they still need to get parental consent, or are they gonna be? 'Cause I know quite a few that are 18 already coming into this school year, so.
Legally, no.
It's gonna look going, but we probably better.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't go as far as we probably better, but I mean, I think it's always a good practice unless the adult student objects to it, is to notify parents.
Right.
Because that becomes then the next issue that the school system gets itself into.
And they're all in the same household.
Yeah.
It's good practice.
Like mine would be 18.
Anything else for Katie on just this slide? Obviously, she has more information to share, but this is an important one. Thanks, Katie. Moving on.
I just have one thing, sorry. During the quarantine then, I'm sure you guys have thought then how kiddos are gonna do stuff virtually or outside of school?
Not later.
That becomes the
Right.
next question. So
How that all happens.
depending on,
That's not later.
depending on what the numbers are, if we're talking, you know, in this is kind of an abstract, there is not a number, but I think it's kind of that deal like when you know it, you see it, you feel it. So depending on what that number is in terms of who's out, if we're talking 1 student or 2, it probably looks a little bit different. If we're talking 6, 7, 8, well then it probably turns into trying to provide some sort of instruction both in person and virtually, or at the very least recording things and then having it basically on demand for those students. So those are logistical hurdles that we would have to clear as well. Good question. Vaccinations, and Katie's going to share some data later, which I do think is important, at least for us to acknowledge and kind of ask ourselves why, perhaps. But obviously, you recall in the past, this was kind of a touchy subject with some individuals about vaccinations, and our students going to be excluded if they have not been vaccinated. No, that's not a practice we've ever employed because kids have a lot of other vaccinations, and in some cases, they're not vaccinated for whatever reason. They're not excluded unless for some reason the health department basically forces that exclusion. We would not require a different masking procedure because we're not going to police who is and who is not vaccinated. While Katie can access that information, that's not something that's gonna be used like to punish or promote or anything like that. But I will say as a general statement, we do encourage eligible students and staff to be vaccinated. The number one strategy on the Public Health Madison-Dane County document is a high vaccination rate. And when Katie gets to that slide later in the presentation, that is something I do want to draw your attention to. So just a little foreshadowing on that. Masking, once again, definitely a topic that I know there's a vested interest in. So in this case, really option A would be reflective of what the CDC and Public Health Madison-Dane County are recommending for us at this point, which is an unvaccinated population. We still do require masking. So that would be the case at Black Earth and Mazo. The other piece that we need to be aware of that doesn't make this quite as neat and tidy as this slide is right now is most of the students in grade 6 will not be vaccinated at the start of the school year. So there would be the potential, depending on how deep into this we want to go or how detail oriented we want to be, that ultimately we would kind of issue that masking requirement for K through 6. Because at the start of the year, very few 6th graders are going to be old enough to be eligible for that vaccination. So that's just something to be aware of. Given the fact that, yes, the students, with the exception of grade 6, our 7th through 12th grade students are eligible for the vaccination. Based on where we're at right now, in this kind of option A, we would strongly recommend it still. That is additional guidance. Now, a recommendation is different than a requirement. So students and parents are going to make decisions at that point based on what they think is best for them and for their families. And then the last piece that I hope, but doesn't always go without saying, is that, I mean, if the public health situation, and I would say locally in particular, if that were to change drastically one way or the other, for the good or for the bad, I think we need to reserve the right to shift and make a different decision if the health situation dictates that's where we're at. Go ahead, thanks, Bev. Second one just kind of takes us a step lower, if you will, in terms of, rather than that language of a requirement, we would kind of shift, and the strong recommendation would be at Black Earth and Mazo, and then once again, potentially including grade 6 in that. We would then shift, rather than a recommendation, to basically using the verbiage optional. It does seem like we're kind of splitting hairs, but you know as well as I do, for some people, they split hairs over this entire situation. So we want to kind of fit what's happening around us as well. And then, yes, the last piece is just that caveat that we could potentially change. So, I mean, if we went this route, and then suddenly at the end of August, the numbers in our census area or in our district skyrocketed, I think we always need to be upfront and honest with people that if those numbers change, we need to be willing to adapt and make changes for what we think is going to help support people's health. Go ahead. Social distancing, I mean, this was just another piece that was included in the public health guidance. Use the word layering again, so trying to layer precautions. The notion of trying to maintain 3 foot of distancing whenever was possible. I gave the example at a previous meeting that we're probably not going to see pods of 4 desks stacked together with kids facing each other face to face. That's probably not happening for a while, but certainly not at the start of this school year. So we're going to do what we can to keep that 3 feet of distancing, just to keep close contacts down if we have a positive case. And then the notion of having assigned seats if we do have a positive, so we can have contact tracing, because it gets hard when you're in classrooms to try to ask a teacher, like, who do you think was around that student for more than 15 minutes? I mean, that becomes a nearly impossible task.
And that will be elementary and high school, middle school, correct?
Correct, Liz. That's something you guys were going to try to employ at the middle school, high school as well, was the distancing on your seating.
Yep.
And the assigned seats?
Yep.
Okay.
School bus and van procedures. Unlike everything else this year, this is the one that's really clear. Thanks to the CDC. If any of you have flown recently, you know that if you're on public transportation right now, it's a law. You have to have a mask on. So That applies to public transportation in schools as well. This is in place until at least September 13th. I have not heard anything one way or the other where it's possibly going, but at least that'll get us through the first 2 weeks of the school year. I would expect it would get us some updated guidance, hopefully in early September, so we can inform people in the bus company. And then I guess the one thing with the bus and the van, at least in this case, we would not have to have a seating chart, unlike what we tried to do last year, which created incredible logistical burden on the bus company, is we would try to do contact tracing on the bus through security footage, because we do have multiple cameras in every bus. The footage is pretty clear, so I do think, and Andy really enjoys watching security footage, so we'd put P.I. Pickett on it. That's not a joke, he does enjoy it. He's a true assistant principal. So
It's probably pretty interesting. I'm sure it is.
So we put him on that task, if that came up. We have been in contact with Right Way, and basically what they've said is, what recommendations you bring to us, we will employ. So that's kind of their company stance. Lunch procedures. Principals, I don't know if there's really anything to add other than what's on the screen, or if there's anything you want to expand on. Once again, just trying to keep distancing, and in this case, I mean, this is an instance where you know you're not going to have a mask on, and potentially for, I guess depending how fast kids eat, which in most cases is incredibly fast, that would be an area for potential transmission. So we're trying to spread kids out as much as we can. Similar at the elementary, what we did at the end of the year, the middle school, high school, it was kind of a neat thing, as the weather allowed for kids to be outside. I think they utilized that relatively responsibly, Ms. Gospel, so we didn't have major concerns over kids abusing that privilege. So I think that's something we would stick with as well, just because it makes sense to get outside, minimize the risk. Cleaning procedures. This is one thing that admittedly, compared to a year ago, we know a lot more about. So whereas last year, we had to clean every possible thing we ever touched as soon as we walked away.
Apples.
Yes. A year later, I have not seen anyone that would say we need to have that level of surface cleaning like we did a year ago. But I mean, just as a good practice, and we talked about this, like this may not just be a COVID response, this might just be like, this is a good practice to have. So the notion of disinfecting rooms at the end of the day, and then high-touch areas intermittently, getting around to clean those areas, we will employ those strategies. But yes, the notion of needing wipes after the end of every session at a desk or a table or something else, I don't think we're at that place anymore, knowing what we know today. All right, Katie, if you're still there, take it away on some data.
Okay, so just an update on where we are in Wisconsin and in Dane County. Unfortunately, we are seeing cases increasing. Actually, through the month of June until the beginning of July, we continued to decrease. In the beginning of July, we were seeing like 60-some average cases a day in Wisconsin. And just in the last couple weeks, we are now up well over 200 again. We're at 254 right now. It's our 14-day average. We've had days that are well over 300 recently. We are at a 3.3% positivity rate. Again, that's under the 5% that we want it to be, but it is increasing, so the amount of testing needed is increasing as well. In Dane County, we are at 25.5 cases per day right now. That has also increased. June, we didn't get too much lower than the 7. We kind of held tight around 7, but we're up to 25.5 right now. And our percent positivity rate has also gone up to almost 2. So I wanted to throw a little bit in about the Delta variant, because that's also become the predominant strain in both Wisconsin and Dane County and most of the US. Just to keep in mind when you're thinking about the disease that's out there right now, this one is really easily transmittable. It spreads really fast. I've talked to you guys a lot about those R0 numbers. For diseases, the original COVID variant that we had was that first one in the top there. It spread. The R0 is how many people it infects. So each individual that's infectious would originally do up 2.5 more people. The B.1.1.7, which is the alpha variant, that would be 4 to 5, and that's what we were seeing in our late winter time. Delta is infecting about 5 to 8 people, so it's had a much higher R0 number. It's not as high as measles. Measles, about 90% of people that get exposed to measles end up getting it, but Delta is pretty high in terms of how many people will likely get it if they're exposed. They're also finding that people with the Delta variant just have a higher viral load. They test positive a lot faster, and your probability of getting it if you're exposed is greater because of that higher viral load. The thing that they're not sure of, even though it's got a higher viral load, is if it's causing more serious infections. That higher viral load isn't not necessarily leading to more serious infections. Some things you look at say it is, some say it isn't. There's just not enough research done on it yet to know if it is or not. So looking at the 7-day average cases per 100,000, in Wisconsin, we're up to 6.1 right now. We had gotten pretty low in June. Dane, we're at 5.5. Our census tract area, we're at 3.2, and then just the Wisconsin Heights area, that's not students, it's everybody, it's at 2.2. So we had, sorry, but you don't have to go back, but we are seeing cases in our area again, which we honestly hadn't been seeing much for cases for quite a while. I added this into just because the CDC, at least in their school guidance, keeps talking about these levels of community transmission and different things you do at different levels of community transmission. So there's low, moderate, substantial, and high transmission. Currently, where we're at for the 7-day total cases per 100,000 is Wisconsin's at 42.3, and Dane County right now is actually 44.8. And that puts us in the moderate transmission range, at the high end of moderate. We were pretty comfortable in the low transmission before, but we've gone up pretty quickly right now. So then just looking at vaccinations, in Wisconsin, we've had almost 3 million people that have started their series, with a pretty close number of how many have completed the series. That just shows me people are very slowly going out there and still getting it, but they are still getting it. We have 51.4% that have gotten at least one dose in Wisconsin. In Dane County is actually one of the best counties in the entire U.S. when it comes to vaccination rates. So that's been really fun to see. We're getting close to 400,000 people that have started the series, with 367,000 that have completed it. And we have a 69.8% that have gotten at least one dose. And Dane County, they say it a lot too, we're over 80% of our eligible population has gotten at least started their vaccine. So that's really good for Dane County. Our staff, we're still at about the same, but these are our numbers from last year. I don't know about any new hires or anything like that for this upcoming year. But for all the staff that we retain, our numbers have been pretty high. And students, we're at about 55.1% that are eligible have gotten their vaccine. Again, that is going off of my list from last year. So after registration happens this year, I'll try to get an updated list of students with who we know will be in the district this year. And the state started putting out some more data where you can, just like I can with COVID numbers, look at what the Wisconsin Heights School District community has been doing. And we have almost 4,000 people that have started their vaccine series. I think there's about 6,200 that are in this population. So that's 63.4%. So we're doing pretty good. We're a little bit behind where Dane County is overall, but we're farther than where the state is overall. So it's a pretty good. But the one thing I like to see, well, don't like to see, but that I've noticed is our students are a lot farther behind that number. Dane counties and our communities in general. So that's an area concerns me a little bit.
Yeah, Katie, so this is what I mentioned before to the board. And I fully understand that this is a very complex topic for some people, and they hold very deep personal beliefs around some vaccinations, but this one in particular. So I'm not advocating for you to go out there and tick people off. What I am advocating for, though, is if people ask you questions about what are things that we can possibly do as a school community to try to best stay in school and to not have quarantines and to not have issues with kids missing classes and needing to be tested, to softly encourage that this is the #1 strategy that we are being told from medical professionals. In the meeting that we had last Friday, the consultants from UW Health were talking to us. Someone, of course, asked the question, what is the percent that you have to get to in your population in school where you start to feel comfortable and think you could kind of back off some of these layered precautions? The doctor was kind enough to kind of put himself out there and said, well, magically, they always talk about 70 to 80% being vaccinated, because then between the vaccination and people that have already been infected, that is the point where you get to that notion of herd immunity. But in our case, being at 55%, we've got some work to do. So however you can use your political status as board members in this community, as friends, as people that care, and like I said, I do get it, and I'm sensitive to that as well. But I also know that there's nothing that we want to be below the average on. And on this one, we're below the average. So whatever we can do to gently encourage, I would just ask that we try to do that.
And those percentages,
Can
are
I
they?
just point out, sorry, too, that yeah, I compared those, but technically they're not comparable because Dane County's number and the Wisconsin Heights community number that you have here is for everybody in the community, not just those that are eligible for the vaccine. The number I have for the students is just those that are eligible. So if you added all of the students, even those that were uneligible, that number would be significantly lower than the other ones.
Yeah. So I have a question, Katie. You said with the site that you could see who's been all vaccinated, but when I got vaccinated, they didn't ask for an ID. It was not through my medical doctor, and with my common name, how would they know that that is me?
With the Wisconsin Immunization Registry, they look it up by name and date of birth typically. Technically, they could use more information, but usually they can find you. That is kind of probably could be an issue out there as well. That not everybody's is in there potentially depending on what information they asked. But I feel like that's probably more of a rare occurrence. It's actually part of the mandate to be able to give vaccines is that you get that information into the Wisconsin Immunization Registry. So to be able to be a vaccinator, you have to guarantee you have those in there within 24 hours. So they have to be collecting some sort of data to be able to get that in.
And then have you heard anything on when the possibility of actually coming out with the full approval instead of the emergency use?
I honestly haven't heard too much more. I keep hearing rumors of this fall for the younger kids, but that's all I've heard.
So what I heard on Friday, because that was actually a question to the medical advisor from UW Health as well, was, the hope is that the approval for whether it's 2 to 11 or 5 to 11 would be right around October 1st. And then the full approval rather than whatever it's called right now, emergency, sometime early in the new year. So January, February, but once again, I don't want to quote him to that, but that's what he said Friday during the meeting.
Matt, have you heard anything different?
No, that's the wrong time frame, I agree. I think the other thing too, that statistic besides encouraging people to consider getting vaccinated, if I were toggling as a board member between option A and option B, that number is what makes me make my decision as to where I'm gonna probably likely to vote the next time we vote on those two options.
It's too bad we can't include the 11-year-olds in that number, you know? Why does it have to stop at 12?
I know.
Just to like get those sixth
That's
graders.
like the middle school age, so it's
Yeah.
kind of like, you know, because there's a lot of places that have middle school and high school combined together,
Uh-huh.
you know, in one building, so
Right.
why they kind of chose to cut it off at
You know, I
11.
hadn't thought of the half, you know, the kids in sixth grade wouldn't have it, and I was just in my head thinking, oh, 6 to 12.
Mhm.
So that was an interesting number, and I was like, well, dang it, why aren't the 11-year-olds able to do it?
So from the file of pretty much everyone, once again, is in this very exciting boat. The configurations of grade levels are all over the place in
Right.
districts. So I mean, there's some that have like intermediate schools, which are like 5th through 7th graders,
Yeah.
or some that have junior, I mean, they're all over the place, so
Yeah.
we're just another district that's in unfortunately the same rock and a hard place if we end up deciding, or whatever we end up deciding, yeah, that 6th grade group is gonna be probably an outlier at that facility, but it is what it is. When the number's 11 and under, we can't do anything about it.
So when we look at our vaccinated kids, are we gonna take into account the ones with natural immunities at all that choose not to get the vaccine yet if they have the natural immunities because they've had it? Or how do we want, are we gonna kind of take that into consideration at all for them?
We don't have a way of counting those, though. We have no way of knowing.
Well, I mean, if we're gonna require masks for unvaccinated, if the ones that have had it,
So we're not
We
gonna
would
require,
do that, though.
we didn't say we'd require a mask for the unvaccinated. It would just be the student population that's ineligible for the
oh,
vaccination.
okay,
So,
okay,
yeah,
okay,
yeah.
that.
We actually
Middle
said-
school,
okay.
the 11-year-olds are kind of that, yeah.
Distinctly said that we would not have a
If you're
different
thinking like the
procedure.
11-year-olds,
Yeah.
that's, you know, if they've already had,
Yeah, I'm just curious with the one, you know, if they, because they have, you know, which, if we're gonna keep it by grade, then,
Yeah.
so that's not gonna.
because I think that would get in a sticky situation dealing with the 11-year-olds, because then you're gonna run into the instance where you're gonna let a lot of kids like, well, everybody that's 12 and older walking around with no mask on, I have to wear one, but then if somebody in their class turns 12 and they get the vaccine, now their friend is walking around, so it's kind of like, it's definitely a rock and a hard place. But I would hope that, you know, as I was reading through a lot of this stuff, in the back of my mind, I'm hoping that the parental and the student responsibilities will kick in, and, you know, we always hope, but cross my fingers, so I'm hoping that people will be responsible about that. But yeah, it's definitely was a sticking point when I was thinking about the whole 11, 12-year-old kind of.
Well, and changing, you know, if you're requiring a non-vaccinated person to wear a mask, it would put a really
Yeah.
tough spot for our staff and
No,
and
it's
teachers.
more about like the quarantining, you know, if they have to quarantine, but they have the natural immunities, do they still have to quarantine the same as someone that's never had it, that's never worn a mask, that's not vaccinated versus one that is vaccinated or the one that
There's
has?
even real good data on
There's
how long it
a-
lasts, and it's arbitrary, it could last not longer for one person, not like
Yeah.
mathematically, you can't like log,
Uh-huh.
your immunity's done in 3 months, so you can start it, you know, I mean, that's just, it's like impossible.
And I think where that all gets incredibly sticky then too, not the least of which is like privacy laws and things like that, but then it's the tracking and the
Right.
monitoring of them, that becomes a full-time job, is who had it, when did they have it, I mean, yeah, that becomes very sticky.
Yeah, because there's no staff or anybody can't walk up to a student and ask them if they're vaccinated. I mean,
No, we wouldn't.
legally, we can't.
You would do that.
Yeah, I'm just saying legally, you know, you can't because of the privacy and the laws. So, that's where I'm hoping that responsibility kicks in, especially when you're talking about people that aren't students and staff that aren't feeling well. Because I've worked with too many of those people that come in and they're on their deathbed, and then they get everybody else sick, so I'm hoping that people are a lot more responsible nowadays.
Hey, you have a question, can you hear me okay? Okay, if not,
Just tell us.
just yell at me, yeah, okay, it was worth a shot. So I was kinda curious about the people that maybe are or are not vaccinated that are testing positive like once a month, or like reoccurring positivity, you know, is it like some type of viral load threshold that even if you have antibodies, but you catch it and it just is always teetering above that, or false positives, or you seem to be reading more about that, that you're wondering, these people testing positive over and over again, are they vaccinated, are they not, or what, you know?
So Katie, that was Barb with the question regarding people who potentially are testing positive, you know, a month or 2 or 3 down the road, whether it's increased viral load or what the cause is of that, and that she's seen more, you know, stories of information about situations like that. Is that something that you're familiar with and have any kind of explanation or feedback on why that's happening?
Or even if they're vaccinated, still
And potentially,
catching
even
it?
if they're vaccinated as well, continuing to test positive?
I mean, the vaccine shouldn't make you test positive, but if you've had the disease, sometimes you test positive for long periods of time. I honestly don't know 100% why that happens. I'd have to look into it a little bit more. I know that is something that has happened, but I can't give you, I have suspicions, but I can't give you an answer without looking it up more.
But they're not ruling out, you can still catch it if you're vaccinated.
Well,
Right,
it's just
right,
not
right,
as
so,
severe.
right,
Right.
so.
And the notion of that is, I mean,
Insane.
for those of us that get the flu vaccine or have in the past, it still seems to be about a flip of the coin if you're gonna get the flu that winter or
Right,
not.
yeah,
The hope
right.
is it's just less severe.
Right. So I guess furthering into the unmasked population, that there's still, I mean, whether you're vaccinated or not, there's, if it's a
Potential
super
still
spreader
there.
event, yeah, I mean.
Katie, anything else on vaccinations?
Not that I can think of.
All right, we'll go on to the next one. Is that you or Katie?
I think that's okay.
That's an old one, so
Oh.
I can go through it again if you want.
No, no. You do not have to go through it again.
We don't wanna revisit anything that
No.
happened last year.
Mr. Pickett?
Yes. All right, so we've got sports coming up quick. You know, the idea as of now would be that we would be getting pretty darn close to normal at this point. If you want to go to the next slide, the WIA did come up with recommendations of sorts. Really, their recommendation is a return to normalization, with a few caveats like full vaccination is strongly encouraged, masks are strongly encouraged if you are not fully vaccinated, and that you just follow your local health guidelines and do little things, you know, with cleaning and not sharing equipment as much as possible, socially distancing when possible, and things like that. And then obviously, like we talked about before, with transportation, that would be an area where masks would have to be required. But otherwise, the idea would be that we would get really close to pre-COVID conditions as far as masking goes in athletics.
You want to go back? I'm sorry.
You know, the WIA did come up with last year, they came up with very, very specific sport by sport guidelines and recommendations, suggestions. It was very detailed. They said that they are not going to be doing that again this year. Of course, the other ones are still there for reference, just to continue a best practice and to be, you know, continue to be safe. However, those are not going to be reissued. So from their standpoint, yeah, we're getting really, really close to normal with athletics.
I have a question regarding attendance at athletics. What is that gonna look like this year?
So attendance at athletics, Andy, was the question from Angie.
Yeah, well, and with, you know, our attendance last year was guided by the county guidelines largely. So, you know, really there's nothing that is, that's going to tell us exactly what our attendance needs to look like. You know, so that's, you know, as of right now, again, I'm anticipating pretty close to normal conditions for attendance in athletics.
Now, is that gonna be for both indoors and outdoors?
That is my assumption, yes.
Okay. And then I'm assuming that when we travel to other schools, if they have other guidelines put in place, we will be required to follow their guidelines as we
Yeah,
did last year?
Yeah, and early indications from pretty much everybody I've talked to is that, they're going back to pre-COVID conditions. So
Okay.
everybody in the Capitol Conference, for example, they are not going to have any guidelines that existed during COVID,
Okay.
as of right now.
So Angie, when you asked about attendance, I was thinking like actually, like if you're not in school,
Oh.
you sure as heck better not be
So-
going to practice.
That's kind of what I was thinking.
But
Yeah, I
are
know.
we, are we gonna be watching that? I mean, if they're in quarantine,
Yeah. they
and if
should-
it's like 2 weeks into the week, and then they have a game on Friday, I mean, I think, is there gonna be coach guidance to
Well,
that?
they'd have to be in school anyway that day in order to be
Yeah.
at practice or
Because
at
a lot
the
of-
game.
lot
That's
of
certainly
them will
something
say-
Andy was monitoring
Yeah.
extensively last year. I mean, when we had situations where students had to be quarantined, I mean, that was a frequent topic of conversation about when it started, when they were eligible to come out, what they could or could not be doing. So I'm assuming that procedure will remain in place.
Because a lot of coaches will say you have to practice this amount of times before, so, but if you're in quarantine Monday and Tuesday and you're there Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, you play for, whatever. However the days fall, but, was just a question.
That's probably might be one of those things where it's gonna be on a kind of a case-by-case
Yeah.
basis almost. I don't know how you, but then it also comes back to, if you have healthy players that have been there all week, and it's a sticky situation. It really is. I wouldn't want to be the one to make that decision whether they play or not, but.
Yeah, but it's hard, because if they had no symptoms, but they were in close contact.
Right, it's not, yeah.
It's not like they couldn't show up.
Yeah.
That's a tough one.
Mhm.
Good
That's
luck, Andy.
another incentive to get vaccinated.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to point to as well. I mean, that's the easy solution, and something that I've encouraged coaches to do, obviously trying to keep this as neutral as possible, but simply stating facts that, hey, if you want to avoid getting shut down, your team or you as an individual, the best way for you to do that is to get vaccinated, and that's what the WIA says as well. They put that catchy phrase at the end: protect yourself, your team, and your season. And so really that's the message that I want to get to the kids is if you want to avoid losing time due to, either being in close contact or getting COVID yourself, get vaccinated. That's the simple solution. Short of that, unfortunately, we have a lot of experience with contact tracing and determining when somebody can play and when they cannot. So we'll navigate that as it comes up. But yeah, the message has been, if you want to avoid that, let's get vaccinated.
Any other questions for Andy? Thanks, Andy. And just kind of recap of where we're at, what we have to look forward to. So obviously tonight was draft procedures. We'll continue to kind of take a look at those, and if there's shifts or adjustments, obviously we'll communicate that to the board. If you have feedback, please do the same prior to that night, preferably, so we're not here that night and we're looking at each other with blank stares. But we'll make updates and kind of refine those procedures, and then present on the 9th. Just wanting to make sure we're all on the same page, so we'll look for board approval on those procedures that night for the start of the school year. And then, some other, to make sure we're still focused on the exciting and positive things, because sometimes this can bring you back down into that feeling. Staff coming back, I had nervous jitters thinking 4 weeks, opening in service, it's time to rock and roll, man. So that's exciting. And then thinking 5 weeks back in
When
school.
this came out, I'm like, my favorite time. Yeah, we're done.
So we've got some exciting dates ahead of us as well. So yeah, the big thing is in the next 10 days, if you have feedback, please share that feedback. And if we have things that we think are shifting because of updated information or numbers or something else, I will be sure to communicate that to you with the board as well.
So I do have one, I had sent an email about just coming back to the whole like masking thing, which I forgot to ask about, but, so I sent out an email about, I've been contacted by 4 parents within a matter of 10 minutes, asking me, what we're gonna do with the masks and everything, and one of the questions that, one of the parents had asked me is, what does the data have to look like for the elementary students if there's no vaccine? What does that need to look like before we can say we're safe? Does it have to be, does the Delta variant have to be gone? Does COVID have to be gone? And that wasn't a question that I could answer, and I wasn't sure. Part of me goes one way, part of me goes the other way. I don't know.
Well, I think that's a future forecast.
Right.
Right now, it's just uneligible population for the vaccine. That's why when they start.
No, she asked what the numbers would need to be if
Right.
there's not a vaccine available for the
Right.
kids, for that to be
So
lifted and to say, we're good.
If this vaccine isn't gonna come out until
For another year.
next year,
Yeah.
what does the numbers have to look like if, the population of eligible, students and people keep growing and growing and growing? At what point do you then say it's safe for the younger
We
kids?
implemented it for summer school and there was
Yeah.
practically 0.
Well, and I think
Yeah.
it goes back to that herd immunity too.
Right.
I mean, yes, we have an unvaccinated population that can't
Right.
get it, but then we also have to look at all of our staff and our teachers, where are they at? And I think
Right.
that goes back to what Jordan said, was, getting to that herd immunity. We're at 55 right now, we should get to 70, 80.
Right.
So I think that's,
Yeah,
we're a
and
long
I
ways
really,
there.
I don't
That's such
really
just a few.
know how to
so
answer
far
that.
out.
I mean, they did make a good valid point though, because,
But the Delta could become obsolete. It could be the next
right,
one.
exactly. But the parent who had asked me this did make a good point about, a lot of people were hoping to have the vaccine for, the younger kids before the start of school. And now it's, they're looking at a little bit longer, and if it goes a little bit longer and longer, she's like, well, what, and I said, I really don't.
No, and I think
No,
honestly,
I can tell you.
for any of us to exactly predict that, I think would be irresponsible, because none of us know. And that
Right.
exact question came up once again with medical advisors from UW Health, and I kind of made this statement before, and I know this doesn't satisfy many people, but it's the notion of like, when you get there, you just kind of feel and you know that
Right.
you've gotten there. And I guess what I will say personally is, had the numbers remained where they were
Right.
in early June, and we're sitting here today with case counts like 7 or 8 in Dane County and staying flat rather than
And
increasing.
kind of increasing with the Delta.
So,
Yeah.
and I'm not making a position here one way or the other, but I think it's kind of that intuition, and where we need to then have open dialogue about this, like,
Right.
is this trending in the right direction right now? So yes, if heaven forbid, instead of October 1st, it becomes January 1st, okay, now we might have to make a decision prior to them being eligible. How are we going to know? I don't know
Right.
if there's any magic number.
Right.
But I think when we see the data around us, we know what this, I guess the other piece is that we can't overlook is our lived experience and what this looks like every day in a school. So if we have kids showing symptoms and we're quarantining kids and we have kids testing positive,
Yeah.
well, we're not rolling back the restrictions, guys, I'm sorry. Like, it's not working well the way it is.
Mhm.
So I think that's the other piece that we can't overlook is, yeah, it's about a month.
Right.
It's gonna be showtime, and whatever the procedure is, either on or off at the elementary level, well, we're gonna start doing action research on September 1st. And we're gonna figure out really quick.
Well, yeah, and what and this is pretty much the same thing I told, all the parents is, I really encourage them, if you wanna speak your piece and like, come and talk to us here, And I said, you know, we are relying a lot on the number data, so I'm hoping that, you know, some of them will, you know, go back and, you know, listen to this. And but yeah, it was quite it was like boom, 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 right in a row. And I was like, holy cow, I'm like, I don't know how to handle this all at once.
I think a
but-
lot of parents just want like a hard number
They
that they
do,
can see
they
and go,
do.
this is what we need to
Yeah.
get to, and then we can
Yeah.
take them off. But
And I
it's
think
so
that's
hard
what she
to-
was kind of looking for, and
Yeah.
I'm like, well, I don't really know. I said, no, and then that's what I told her, I said, nobody
Yeah.
knows.
Satisfying
You
part
know,
that
nobody
the
really
fatigue of all
knows.
this, because
Yeah.
it speeds on, and they want to find
Yeah.
out, there is none, so.
Yeah,
like,
it's hard to,
What we've
yeah.
been saying all along is this is a constant evolution and of depending on everything.
Yeah, one step at a
constant,
time.
you Look at everything on a
I guess the other
daily
thing we just need
basis,
to,
too.
this is important, perspective. So let's reflect to a year ago tonight.
Yeah.
We were not in person for
Right.
any instruction other than support hubs and special services. And we were making incredibly difficult decisions, and not that this is not difficult, but to sit here today and to feel anything like we felt a year ago, I guess for me personally, I don't at all, because I know one way or another, short of a catastrophe, we're gonna have 775 or 80 kids in these buildings a month from now. Now, there may be some kids wearing a mask. We'll see what happens in the next couple of weeks and what you guys decide. But to sit here today and to like feel like we're in the same position we were a year ago, we are in a completely different position than we were a year ago. I get it's frustrating. I got 3 small kids too. They're all in elementary.
Yep.
I get it. But, so we can't let ourselves get weighed down and feel like, oh, this sucks. We're in the same spot we were last July, because we are not. We will have all of our kids who want to be here in person, will be here in person.
That's another question that I had. Do we have any sense of how many students won't be coming in person? Is there?
Very few.
Very few?
Like a handful-ish.
Okay. And is that across like all elementary
It's like
up to
throughout
high
the
school?
district.
Okay.
We still need to contact a few and lock things in with a few families, but I mean, from that group at the end of the year that looked like there was a possibility, getting a hold of them this summer, yes, short of a handful, they've all indicated that they're interested in being back in person.
Are they gonna have an option to change if they choose to in the middle of?
I mean, I guess to me, that's an administrative decision that we need to make at that time, because I mean, do we ever want to put ourselves in a position where we tell a family, sorry, we're not gonna try to meet your needs? I mean, that's a position that we never want to be in. So unless we absolutely don't have the physical or whatever resources to meet their needs, then I don't know that we would ever, as principals or administrators, say like, oh, sorry, good luck somewhere else. So I don't want to advocate for that, of
Yeah.
course, because that becomes a logistical nightmare, but the notion that we would tell people they don't have options, that's not great customer service.
I just know there's some schools that are doing that, so I just
Yeah.
wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, no,
They
I
do
just-
have an option.
I don't know
Yeah.
that I would think that would be counter to our customer service model and who we pride ourselves in being.
I would just say also, you know, for those people saying, I want a date, when it's gonna change. I think the part that everybody has to recognize is, we have students now that can, at 12 years old, go and get their vaccine, but they're not. So what's the difference between now and the next time they lower that to 2 years old? Not everybody's gonna run out and go get their vaccine. It's still gonna take, once that becomes available, it's gonna take months for us to even get to 50% again. So I think we are in a long haul. This is not a short stick.
But just celebrate the short win of in person.
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
Yeah, I know.
Exactly.
To what end can we not celebrate something?
Yeah, like I said,
Be optimistic about.
it is exhausting, but it's better for your mental health.
And through my child's eyes, who's terrified about wearing a mask, has said nothing but that she loves summer school and being with her friends. You wouldn't even know she's wearing a mask, and just, I mean, it's just the note of being with kids in an environment where you're learning.
Well, I think it's also helped them, especially with mine, because they're super sweaty all the time, but, then when they're outside, they can take it off. Cody brought me his mask, and it's like, oh, I was like, Yeah, I mean, for the most part, my kids, they didn't really care either, you know, one way or
I
another,
think the
so.
younger ones did better with it than the older ones.
When you talk about the modeling, I mean, so
Yeah,
we've run a few
definitely.
meetings over here. And it's the same thing for us. We put our mask on when we walk in the building, the kids see you. If you would not have one on, they will ask you, where is your mask? And they say it in a polite way, but they're very sincere about it. And I mean, so at that end, like at this level, as long as as adults you're modeling the right behavior, you're reinforcing it in a positive way, kids will just about do anything you ask them to do at this level.
Right, yeah. And I
It is
think
different than the high school
especially-
level.
Yeah, I think especially at this point, for them to be able, like you said, to be in school with their friends and, you know, see everybody, you know,
Well,
I
and even
think
to
that's.
the parent
is the best
standpoint, I
part.
mean, the other piece is that those scenarios with the quarantines, I mean, I guess that's another point we don't want to lose in all of this in terms of like the positivity to some of this, is depending on the decisions we make. The notion of potentially having your child out on quarantine because other kids aren't wearing a mask, that becomes a tough sell too, and that goes back to things we did talk about a year ago, where we said we wanted to avoid the yo-yo of in and out of in-person and online instruction. And we're in an unmasked environment at this building and at Maisel Elementary. None of us can predict the future, but there is a possibility we're gonna be on a yo-yo until more people get vaccinated, because I can't predict if anyone's gonna walk through that door and test positive for COVID, but if they do, we're gonna have to send some kids home.
Real quick, has there been any talk on how to run our open house?
So that is Thursday of insert this week from 2 to 6. So information should be coming out, I would say in the next week or two, from building principals, just with information to families, but we're having an open house from 2 to 6 on Thursday, August 26th. That's actually going to be picture day as well. At the middle school, high school, their devices are going to be distributed that night as well to whoever shows up. So Chromebooks to the middle school kids and laptops to the high school kids. So yeah, that'll be an exciting day.
All right. Anything else on operational updates or good to go? I think we could talk for, there's so many variants.
Like I said, please don't hesitate to reach out.
All right, so we will move on then to budget and finance. Do I have a motion to approve the change in adoption, or in the adopted budget for 2021? Or does anybody have questions on it first?
Yep, so just year-end process, auditing process, Cheryl, that, for the auditors were in the district last week, just finalizing budget numbers for the end of the year, final shifts between accounts. Bottom line remains the same, it's just shifting items between various accounts, so this is something that we need to get approved by the board.
I move to adopt it.
I'll second.
Thank you both. Any other questions? Not hearing any. Mary Beth? Yes. Matt?
Yes.
Barb? Yes. Angie?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
And I'll say yes as well. I would look for a motion to approve 7-1 to 7-4. Go individually.
Second.
Thank you all. We will go ahead then and call for the 7-1 through 7-4. Is there any questions? Thank you to Karen. Great to have Megan and Cody and Rachel on as well for our local viewers. It's awesome for the sports. Okay. All right. Hearing nothing else, Mary Beth?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Barb?
Yes.
Angie?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
I'll say yes as well. Don't know if we have questions, so I will go through these individually. 8-1, do I have a motion to approve the academic and career plan for 21-22?
I move to approve it.
I'll second.
Any questions? All right, well, hearing none then. Mary Beth?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Barb?
Yes.
Angie?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
And I'll say yes as well. We can take 8-2 and 8-3 together and in and out unless somebody has questions. Opinions or whatever. You can hold your opinions here. Do I have a motion for 8-2 and 8-3?
So moved.
Second.
Mary Beth?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Barb?
Yes.
Angie?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
And I'll say yes as well. All right, district business policies. For 9-1, do I have a motion to approve the annual notices from 21 to 22? These again are just annual notices that we have to do every year.
I'll make a motion.
Second.
Thank you. Any questions on the documents? Hearing none, Mary Beth?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Barb?
Yes.
Angie?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
And I'll say yes as well. And the other one, educational standards for 21, 22, same thing.
I'll make a motion.
Second.
Thank you, Angie and Matt. Anything else for those? No. Come on, James, where are you? Mary Beth?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Barb?
Yes.
Angie?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
And I'll say yes as well. Do I have a motion to approve a donation in the amount of $2,100 from Friends of Joseph Brown for the Special Education Department?
I move to approve it.
Second.
Thank you, Matt and Barb. Very much thank you.
Can I say something about that?
Love to, yes, please do.
So, we have a plaque, some of you who have known Joseph around the community.
Oh, that's so neat.
I'm gonna read what's
Yeah.
on the
Yes,
plaque.
please do, that's what I was doing.
Oh, very nice.
It's great.
Yeah, it's a donation of $2,100, and it says you could always count on Joe for a wave and a smile as he was riding his Dr. Pepper bike around Blackbird. Joe could often be found on Sundays at the shack or the bowling alley enjoying a Mountain Dew, and there might be something else that he was enjoying too. We didn't put that on the plaque, so we didn't put it on the school.
Keep it clean.
That's why you're so wise, Dr. Dan.
Enjoying a Mountain Dew and cheering on his beloved Green Bay Packers.
Oh, that's so
Very
nice.
So I just have to say, having a brother with a disability, Joe reminded me of my brother, and it just, it's a special place in my heart when you have community members, community businesses like bowling alley and the shack, that can kind of wrap their arms around, someone who just needs a lot of support, so.
I think that's one of the best things about our small town.
It sure is.
Yeah.
So thank you, Pam at the shack really helped coordinate this and Cindy Page as well.
Very cool, thank you. Harry, we have a motion then on the table. Mary Beth?
Yeah.
Matt?
Yes.
Barb?
Yes.
Angie?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
I'll say yes as well, thank you. Future meeting dates, you will see those again, as Jordan said, we will be here for one more week on August 9th, and then we will be moving back.
Sure hope so. We better.
You got it. The pressure is on.
He knows.
All right, well then with that, I will, have our clerk call a roll to adjourn to executive session pursuant to Wisconsin statutes 19.85, parent 1, parent 8, to deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session.
Angie Wolf?
Yes.
Barb Stutz?
Yes.
Matt Crowe?
Yes.
Mary Beth Schultz? James Cartman? Cindy Bykent?
Here, yep.